In the remote wilderness of Colorado Territory, where a man could disappear from the world's judgment and find peace in absolute solitude, Thomas McKenna had built his sanctuary far from the sins and temptations that had once consumed his soul. For 3 years, his cabin had remained untouched by visitors, exactly as he preferred it. But fate has a way of testing even the most devoted hermits. When desperate knocking shattered the silence of his mountain retreat, Thomas opened his door to find someone whose very presence would challenge everything he thought he knew about faith, desire, and the true meaning of salvation. This is the incredible story of how an unexpected visitor transformed a hermit's quiet existence into a test of everything sacred, proving that sometimes the greatest spiritual battles are fought not in prayer, but in the human heart. Ready for a story that will challenge your beliefs about love and faith? Hit that like button if you believe true love conquers all obstacles. Subscribe and ring that notification bell, because tales like this prove that destiny finds us even in our most hidden places. Drop a comment about unexpected visitors who changed your life. I read every single one. The year was 1883, and Thomas McKenna had spent exactly 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days in complete isolation from human society, a self-imposed exile that had transformed him from a broken man, fleeing his past, into something approaching the peaceful hermit he had always dreamed of becoming in his darkest moments of spiritual crisis. His cabin sat in a hidden valley 8 miles from the nearest settlement, accessible only by a treacherous mountain trail that discouraged casual visitors and provided the perfect sanctuary for someone seeking to escape the world's judgment and his own tortured conscience. The location offered everything Thomas needed for solitary survival while ensuring that his past could never find him. Thomas had built the cabin with his own hands during his first year of exile, using skills learned during his previous life as a carpenter in Denver, before alcohol and gambling had destroyed his reputation and driven him to seek redemption through complete withdrawal from temptation. Every board and nail represented his commitment to a different way of living. The daily routine that governed Thomas's existence was as rigid as any monastery's schedule, designed to fill every hour with productive activity that left no time for the destructive thoughts and desires that had once ruled his life. He rose at dawn, tended his garden, chopped wood, read scripture, and retired early, finding peace in predictability and purpose. Thomas's library consisted of 3 books: the Bible, Pilgrim's Progress, and a collection of spiritual meditations, which he read and reread with the dedication of a scholar seeking divine truth in familiar words. His isolation had deepened his relationship with God, while eliminating the distractions that had previously prevented him from achieving genuine spiritual understanding and personal peace. The nearest neighbors lived miles away and respected Thomas's obvious desire for solitude, occasionally leaving supplies at a designated spot where he could retrieve them without human contact. This arrangement satisfied his need for basic goods while maintaining the isolation that had become essential to his mental and spiritual health after years of destructive social interaction. Thomas's physical transformation during his years of solitude reflected his spiritual growth, as hard work and clean living had replaced the soft weakness of his dissolute past with lean strength and clear eyes that no longer carried the shame and guilt that had driven him to the mountains. His appearance now matched his reformed character and renewed faith. The peace Thomas had found in isolation was so complete that he often went days without speaking aloud, communicating only with God through prayer and meditation that filled the silence with spiritual communion deeper than any human conversation he had ever experienced. His solitude had become a form of worship that connected him directly to divine presence. Winter preparations occupied much of Thomas's time during the autumn months, as survival in the high country required careful planning and hard work that left little opportunity for the idleness that had once led him into temptation. His self-sufficiency was both practical necessity and spiritual discipline that proved his ability to live righteously without external support or supervision. The garden that provided most of Thomas's food had been expanded each year as his skills improved and his understanding of mountain agriculture developed through trial and error. His success in growing vegetables and herbs at high altitude demonstrated the same determination and patience that characterized his spiritual growth and personal reformation through disciplined living. Thomas's prayers had evolved from desperate pleas for forgiveness into grateful conversations with a God who had provided him with exactly the refuge and redemption he needed to rebuild his character from the foundation up. His isolation had taught him that true peace came from within, rather than from external circumstances or social approval. The satisfaction Thomas found in his hermit's existence was so profound that he often wondered why he had ever thought happiness could be found in the saloons and gambling halls that had once consumed his time and money. His mountain sanctuary offered everything he needed for contentment, meaningful work, spiritual growth, and freedom from the temptations that had nearly destroyed his soul. Thomas's commitment to his solitary life was absolute, strengthened by 3 years of proof that isolation provided the peace and spiritual growth that social interaction had never delivered. He had found his calling as a hermit and intended to maintain his withdrawn existence until death claimed him in the wilderness he had learned to call home. The disruption of Thomas's carefully ordered existence came without warning on a cold October evening, when desperate pounding on his cabin door shattered the silence that had reigned undisturbed for months. The sound was so unexpected that he initially thought it might be a dream or hallucination, but the persistent knocking demanded investigation, despite his reluctance to face whatever crisis had brought someone to his remote sanctuary. Thomas opened his cabin door to find a young woman in torn religious habit, her dark hair escaping from a damaged wimple as she swayed on her feet from exhaustion and cold. Her brown eyes held desperation mixed with relief at finding shelter, while her obviously feminine figure strained against the modest clothing that marked her as a member of some religious order. "Please, sir," she gasped through chattering teeth. "I've been walking for 2 days without food or proper rest. I saw your light and prayed that whoever lived here might show Christian mercy to someone in desperate need of shelter and protection from dangers I cannot face alone in this wilderness." Thomas's first instinct was to close the door and preserve the isolation that had become sacred to him. But the woman's obvious distress and the Christian duty that had been drummed into him since childhood made such cruelty impossible. Against every principle of his hermit existence, he stepped aside and gestured for her to enter his sanctuary. Sister Catherine Moreau, as she introduced herself once safely inside the warm cabin, explained that she had fled the convent of Our Lady of Sorrows after discovering corruption among the Mother Superior and senior nuns that made continued residence impossible for someone with genuine faith. Her escape had been hasty and poorly planned, leaving her stranded in the mountains without supplies or clear destination. The nun's story of ecclesiastical corruption resonated with Thomas's own experiences of disillusionment with religious authority, though his crisis had involved personal sin rather than institutional failure. Her presence in his cabin created an immediate dilemma between his vow of isolation and his Christian obligation to provide sanctuary for someone clearly in need of protection and assistance. Catherine's obvious exhaustion made immediate practical decisions necessary, despite Thomas's spiritual turmoil about housing a woman in his hermit's retreat. He provided food, blankets, and a place by the fire, while struggling with emotions he had successfully suppressed during 3 years of careful solitude, designed to eliminate exactly these kinds of complications and temptations. The nun's beauty was impossible to ignore despite her religious garb and Thomas's determination to maintain spiritual focus. As her graceful movements and intelligent conversation awakened feelings he had thought permanently buried beneath layers of religious discipline and deliberate isolation. Her presence transformed his sanctuary into a test of everything he had learned about self-control and spiritual dedication. Catherine's gratitude for his kindness was expressed with warmth that penetrated defenses Thomas had built against human connection, her smile and gentle manner reminding him of everything he had sacrificed to achieve peace through solitude. The comfortable conversation that developed between them felt dangerously natural after years of speaking only to God and occasional woodland creatures. The practical arrangements for Catherine's overnight stay forced intimate proximity that challenged both their religious commitments, as Thomas's small cabin provided little privacy, and her need for rest and warmth required sharing space that had been designed for solitary occupation. The situation tested every boundary that separated hermit existence from human fellowship and attraction. Thomas's internal struggle between hospitality and self-preservation intensified as Catherine's presence filled his cabin with feminine energy that made his isolation feel suddenly empty rather than peaceful. Her laughter at his awkward attempts at conversation reminded him of social pleasures he had deliberately abandoned in pursuit of spiritual purity and freedom from worldly temptation. Catherine's own conflicted feelings about her religious vocation emerged gradually as she described her doubts about convent life and her growing certainty that God might be calling her to a different form of service than the cloistered existence she had originally embraced. Her spiritual questioning paralleled Thomas's own journey toward understanding divine purpose through unexpected circumstances. The night passed slowly as both Thomas and Catherine struggled with emotions and attractions that challenged their respective commitments to religious life and spiritual discipline. Neither could deny the connection developing between them, though both understood that pursuing such feelings would require abandoning vows and principles that had defined their identities and purposes. Morning brought difficult decisions about Catherine's future, and Thomas's obligation to help her reach safety without compromising his own spiritual discipline or her religious commitments. The practical need for planning her departure conflicted with their mutual reluctance to end an encounter that had awakened feelings both had thought permanently suppressed through religious dedication. Catherine's reluctance to leave the peace and safety of Thomas's cabin reflected more than simple gratitude for shelter, as she had found in his company something that had been missing from her convent experience. Her growing attraction to both the man and the simple life he had created challenged everything she thought she knew about her religious calling. The blizzard that began during Catherine's second morning at the cabin made travel impossible and extended her stay indefinitely, creating circumstances that tested both their spiritual resolve and their growing attraction to each other. The storm seemed divinely orchestrated to force them into prolonged intimacy that challenged every boundary they had established in their religious lives. Thomas's daily routines were completely disrupted by Catherine's presence, as her help with cooking and cleaning created domestic partnership that felt dangerously natural despite his commitment to solitary existence. Her efficiency and grace in managing household tasks transformed his hermit shelter into something approaching a real home, awakening longings he had thought permanently suppressed. Catherine's questions about Thomas's past and his reasons for choosing isolation led to conversations that revealed the spiritual wounds and personal failures that had driven him to seek redemption through complete withdrawal from society. Her understanding and lack of judgment about his previous sins created intimacy that was more dangerous than physical attraction. The forced confinement created opportunities for accidental contact that sent shockwaves through both their carefully controlled emotional defenses, as simple touches while passing dishes or sharing warmth by the fire awakened desires that challenged everything they thought they knew about their spiritual commitments and the nature of divine calling. Thomas's struggle with his growing feelings for Catherine was complicated by genuine respect for her intelligence and spiritual depth, which made their connection seem more than simple physical attraction. Her mind challenged his thoughts, while her presence filled emotional needs he had convinced himself were permanently conquered through disciplined isolation and religious devotion. Catherine's own crisis of faith deepened as she compared the peace and genuine spirituality of Thomas's simple life with the political corruption and empty ritual she had experienced in the convent. His authentic relationship with God through practical service and honest living seemed more genuinely religious than the formal structures she had abandoned. The theological discussions that filled their snowed-in days revealed shared understanding about the difference between institutional religion and personal faith, creating intellectual and spiritual intimacy that was more threatening to their religious commitments than physical desire. Their compatibility extended beyond attraction to include fundamental agreement about the nature of divine purpose and human calling. Thomas's attempts to maintain appropriate distance were undermined by practical necessities, and Catherine's obvious need for comfort and reassurance about her uncertain future. His protective instincts warred with his commitment to isolation, while her gratitude and growing affection challenged his determination to avoid emotional entanglements that might compromise his spiritual discipline. The crisis came when Catherine suffered a fever that required Thomas's direct care, forcing physical intimacy that shattered the last barriers between them as he tended her illness with devotion that revealed the depth of his feelings. Her vulnerable dependence on his care awakened protective instincts and tender emotions that overwhelmed his spiritual defenses. Catherine's recovery brought clarity about their mutual feelings and the impossibility of maintaining their previous religious commitments while honoring the love that had developed between them. Neither could deny that their encounter had transformed their understanding of divine purpose and the forms that spiritual calling might take in devoted lives. Thomas's proposal that Catherine stay permanently and become his wife represented complete abandonment of his hermit's vow and acceptance of a different path towards spiritual fulfillment through human partnership. His offer included practical plans for their life together and theological justification for their choice to pursue love rather than institutional religious obligations. Catherine's acceptance of Thomas's proposal marked her final break with convent life and embrace of a new understanding of how God might work through human love and partnership rather than through isolated religious service. Her decision required courage to abandon everything familiar in favor of uncertain but genuine spiritual partnership with someone who shared her deepest values. The marriage ceremony they performed for themselves in the privacy of Thomas's cabin, witnessed only by God, and the wilderness that had brought them together, represented their commitment to a form of religious life that honored divine will through human love rather than institutional obligation. Their union became a new form of spiritual practice. Their wedding night transformed Thomas's hermit's cabin into a sanctuary of a different kind, where love and faith combined to create spiritual fulfillment that neither had found in their previous religious commitments. Their physical union became an expression of divine love rather than abandonment of spiritual purpose. The spring that followed Catherine and Thomas's wilderness marriage brought new understanding of how divine purpose could be fulfilled through human partnership rather than isolated religious service, as their combined efforts to help other lost souls created a ministry more effective than either had achieved through institutional religious commitments. Their cabin became a refuge for travelers and outcasts seeking spiritual guidance. Catherine's medical knowledge, gained during her convent training, combined with Thomas's practical skills to provide essential services for the scattered mountain communities that had previously lacked access to healthcare and spiritual counsel. Their partnership demonstrated how love could multiply individual capabilities while serving divine purpose through dedicated service to those in need. The couple's reputation for helping others spread throughout the territory as word passed among miners, ranchers, and travelers about the former hermit and runaway nun, who provided both medical care and spiritual guidance without judgment or payment. Their ministry grew organically as people sought their assistance with problems ranging from physical injuries to spiritual crises. Thomas's transformation from isolated hermit to community helper was completed through Catherine's influence and their shared commitment to serving others as an expression of their love for God and each other. His previous solitude had prepared him for leadership by teaching self-discipline and spiritual depth that now benefited everyone who sought their help. Catherine's own spiritual growth flourished outside institutional constraints, as she discovered that genuine religious service came through addressing real human needs rather than following prescribed rituals and rules. Her freedom from convent restrictions allowed her natural compassion and intelligence to serve divine purpose more effectively than formal religious structures had permitted. The children who eventually blessed their marriage grew up understanding that love and service were inseparable aspects of spiritual life, inheriting both parents' commitment to helping others while enjoying the security of a home built on genuine faith and mutual devotion. Their family became a model of how religious commitment could be expressed through human partnership. The community that developed around their mountain sanctuary included other outcasts and seekers who found in Thomas and Catherine's example proof that spiritual fulfillment could be achieved through love and service rather than institutional conformity. Their leadership created an alternative religious community based on practical Christianity rather than formal doctrine. Catherine's influence on Thomas extended beyond personal happiness to include renewed engagement with the world he had fled, as her presence gave him courage to face his past while building a future that honored both his spiritual growth and his human need for companionship. Their love healed wounds that isolation alone could never have addressed. The legacy of their unconventional spiritual partnership challenged traditional understanding of religious vocation, while demonstrating that divine calling could take many forms when guided by genuine faith and selfless service. Their story became legend among mountain communities that valued authenticity over conformity to institutional expectations. Thomas's final understanding of his spiritual journey recognized that his years of isolation had been preparation for partnership rather than an end in themselves, as his hermit's discipline had taught him the self-control and spiritual depth necessary for successful marriage and community leadership. Solitude had prepared him for love rather than replacing it. Catherine's escape from the convent had led not to abandonment of religious life, but to discovery of its true meaning through service, motivated by love rather than obligation, proving that spiritual calling could be fulfilled through human partnership when guided by genuine faith and commitment to helping others. Her choice had been divinely inspired rather than rebellious. The mountain valley that had witnessed their unusual courtship and marriage became a symbol of how God could work through unexpected circumstances to bring together souls destined for partnership in divine service, demonstrating that love and faith were complementary rather than competing forces in truly spiritual lives dedicated to serving others. Their story proved that sometimes the greatest spiritual adventures begin when careful plans are disrupted by unexpected visitors who carry divine purpose disguised as personal crisis, and that true religious calling might require abandoning institutional safety in favor of authentic faith, expressed through human love and service to those in need. The hermit who had sought peace through isolation and the nun who had fled institutional corruption found their true spiritual calling through love that transformed personal happiness into ministry that served divine purpose more effectively than either could have achieved alone, proving that God's greatest work is often accomplished through hearts willing to risk everything for love.